Have you ever noticed that some people seem to receive exactly what they expect from life? Not what they wish for, not what they pray for, not even what they consciously want, what they expect. The person who expects rejection somehow keeps finding it. The person who expects struggle somehow keeps living it. The person who expects opportunities somehow keeps discovering them. The person who expects life to support them somehow keeps finding doors opening at the perfect moment. And at first, it looks like luck. It looks like coincidence. It looks like some people were simply born under a lucky star while others weren't. But the older you get, the more you begin to notice something strange. Reality seems to have a habit of agreeing with the stories people tell themselves. Think about that. The person who says, "Nothing ever works out for me," eventually finds proof. The person who says, "People always leave," eventually finds proof. The person who says, "Life is hard," eventually finds proof. And the person who says, "Everything is always working out for me," somehow finds proof too. How is that possible? How can people live on the same planet, walk through similar circumstances, and yet experience completely different realities? Maybe the answer is simpler than we think. Maybe reality is listening. Not just when you pray, not just when you meditate, not just when you're trying to manifest, but all the time. Every thought, every word, every assumption, every complaint, every expectation, every story. Imagine for a moment that your entire life is a conversation. Not a conversation with a universe somewhere above the clouds, not a conversation with something separate from you, but a conversation with the deepest part of yourself, the part of you that creates, the part of you that perceives, the part of you that gives meaning to everything you experience. Because here's what most people never realize. You are never silent. You may stop talking to other people. You may sit alone in a quiet room. You may close your eyes and say nothing. But internally, the conversation never stops. There is always a voice, always a story, always a narrative. And that narrative becomes the lens through which you experience your entire life. The problem is that most people never question it. They simply inherit it. A child isn't born believing they're not enough. A child isn't born believing life is a struggle. A child isn't born believing they're unlucky. Those stories are learned, they are repeated, they are practiced, until one day they feel like facts. But what if they were never facts? What if they were only stories? Stories repeated so many times that you forgot they were stories. Think back to the last time something went wrong. Maybe someone ignored your message. Maybe a plan didn't work out. Maybe something disappointed you. What was the first thing you said to yourself? Because that's where manifestation begins. Not with affirmations, not with vision boards, not with techniques, with interpretation. Some people experience rejection and immediately think, "I knew it, nobody chooses me." Others experience rejection and think something better must be on its way. Same event, different meaning, different reality. And that's where most people miss the secret. Reality doesn't just respond to events. Reality responds to the meaning you attach to those events. Because meaning becomes belief, belief becomes expectation, expectation becomes experience, and experience reinforces belief. The cycle continues over and over again until someone becomes conscious enough to interrupt it. Maybe that's why you're here right now. Maybe you're tired of living inside the same patterns. Maybe you're tired of feeling like life is happening to you. Maybe a part of you knows there must be more. Because there is. But before we go deeper, I want you to understand something. This isn't about blaming yourself. This isn't about saying every difficult experience is your fault. Life is more complex than that. Pain happens, loss happens, unexpected things happen. But what you choose to believe about those experiences determines who you become afterward. And who you become afterward determines the reality you create next. That is where your power lives, not in controlling every event, but in choosing the story that follows it. You see, most people think their words are harmless. They think they're just describing reality, but often they're programming it. Every time you say, "I'm always stressed," you strengthen an identity. Every time you say, "I'm bad with money," you strengthen an identity. Every time you say, "Nobody understands me," you strengthen an identity. And identity is powerful, because reality is always trying to remain consistent with who you believe you are. If you believe you're someone who struggles, you'll find struggle everywhere. If you believe you're someone who's supported, you'll begin noticing support everywhere. The outer world starts reflecting the inner world, not perfectly, not instantly, but consistently. And here's where everything begins to change. Because the moment you realize this, you stop asking, "What am I manifesting?" and start asking, "Who am I being?" Because who you are being determines what you keep speaking, and what you keep speaking becomes the reality you continue to experience. Maybe you've spent years saying you want abundance, but internally you've been speaking the language of lack. Maybe you've spent years wanting love, but internally you've been speaking the language of fear. Maybe you've spent years wanting confidence, but internally you've been speaking the language of self-doubt. And reality, like an echo, keeps repeating back what it hears most often. Not your occasional wishes, your consistent language. That's why your inner conversations matter more than almost anything else. Because those conversations reveal what you truly believe. Not what you hope, not what you pretend, what you actually believe. And reality listens closely to belief. Imagine walking through life carrying an invisible microphone. Every thought amplified, every assumption recorded, every expectation transmitted. What would reality hear from you? Would it hear trust or fear? Would it hear confidence or doubt? Would it hear possibility or limitation? Would it hear someone expecting miracles or someone expecting disappointment? Most people never ask themselves these questions. They spend years trying to change the reflection without changing the mirror. They want different results while maintaining the same language, different outcomes while maintaining the same identity, different experiences while repeating the same story. But change doesn't begin in circumstances, it begins in consciousness. It begins the moment you become aware of the conversation happening inside your own mind. Because awareness is where transformation starts. The moment you notice a limiting belief, you're no longer trapped by it. The moment you notice a self-defeating story, you can rewrite it. The moment you become aware of a fear-based identity, you can choose a new one. And that choice changes everything. Not because the world changes overnight, but because you do. And when you change, your relationship with reality changes. Your relationship with opportunities changes. Your relationship with love changes. Your relationship with yourself changes. And maybe that's the greatest manifestation of all. Not the money, not the relationship, not the success, the relationship you have with yourself. Because once you truly trust yourself, life becomes different. Once you truly believe in yourself, life becomes different. Once you stop fighting yourself, life becomes different. And maybe that's the message you've been waiting to hear. You do not need to become someone else. You do not need to earn your worth. You do not need permission to believe in your potential. You do not need proof before you trust yourself. You only need to remember. Remember who you were before fear convinced you otherwise. Remember who you were before limitations became familiar. Remember who you were before you started speaking to yourself like an enemy. Because underneath all the conditioning, underneath all the doubt, underneath all the stories, there is still a creator. There is still a dreamer. There is still a powerful consciousness capable of choosing again.
And right now, in this moment, you have a choice. You can continue repeating the same story, or you can begin a new one. You can continue speaking from fear, or you can begin speaking from creation. You can continue identifying with your limitations, or you can begin identifying with your possibilities. Because your reality is listening. It always has been. Not judging, not testing, not withholding. Listening, responding, reflecting. And maybe that's the most beautiful realization of all. You were never alone. You were never powerless. You were never disconnected from creation. You were creation, experiencing itself through a human life, learning, growing, remembering.
And now that you remember, speak carefully, speak lovingly, speak powerfully. Speak as the version of yourself that knows who they are. Speak as the version of yourself that trusts life. Speak as the version of yourself that expects good things. Speak as the version of yourself that understands their value. Speak as the version of yourself that knows their future is not written by fear. Because every thought is a seed, every word is a signal, every belief is an instruction, and every day reality is listening. So from this moment forward, tell a story worthy of the life you want to live. Tell a story worthy of your potential. Tell a story worthy of your dreams. Tell a story worthy of the Creator within you. And one day you'll look around at your life and realize something extraordinary. The reality you were chasing never arrived from somewhere outside. It emerged from within you. The moment you remembered who you were, the moment you changed the conversation, the moment you stopped speaking as someone waiting to be saved and started speaking as someone who finally remembered they were the Creator. If you liked this video, then hit like, share, and subscribe for more content like this.